Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
Burnout hit me hard after spending 8 years steadily climbing the corporate ladder at different tech companies in Silicon Valley. The constant pressure, endless meetings, and soul-crushing commute finally broke me. That's when I stumbled upon this job posting for a mid-sized company in the Midwest. They needed someone with exactly my skill set, and they were offering remote work with just 4 weeks of office time per year. It seemed perfect. The pay was good, the benefits were excellent, and I could finally escape the rat race. I took the job without hesitation, packed up my apartment, and moved to a quiet beach town in North Carolina. For 2 years, everything ran like clockwork. I'd fly out to the office once every quarter, spend a week there, and return home. The company covered all my expenses, hotel, flights, everything. It was simple and straightforward. That was until our accounting department decided to reinvent the wheel. It started with a financial audit in October. Apparently, our system of giving managers company credit cards with $1,500 limits wasn't controlled enough. The accounting team's solution: a new purchase order system for literally everything. And I mean everything. In early October, I sent an email requesting a purchase order for my November hotel stay, mentioning the current rate of $550 for 4 nights. I thought I was being proactive, especially since this wasn't my usual flexible timing. Our Chief Executive Officer and Chief Financial Officer had specifically requested my presence before strategic planning sessions. 2 weeks passed without any response. When I checked the hotel rates again, my stomach dropped. The price had jumped to $700. That's when I noticed something else too. There was a major concert that week, followed by a huge college sports event. Great! I sent another email alerting them about the rising rates and diminishing room availability. The head of accounting's response was dismissive, stating that everyone had different priorities, and my purchase order would be processed after all the ones before it. This wasn't about buying office supplies or new equipment. This was about a required business trip. Every few days I checked the rates. They kept climbing. Every week I'd send an email asking for updates on the approval. Silence was the only response I got. Each time I asked about the room availability, I was met with more silence. Finally, a week before the trip, I sent one last desperate email, copying the Chief Financial Officer. I explained that if I couldn't book a room that day, there wouldn't be any available rooms left, meaning I wouldn't be able to attend the strategic planning sessions. The head of accounting finally responded with a terse message, simply authorizing me to reserve a hotel room for 4 nights. No apology, no acknowledgement of the delay, nothing. I booked the room, now $1,200, and tried not to think about it. Fast forward to last week when I submitted my expense report, the Chief Financial Officer called me, absolutely furious. He demanded to know what I was thinking spending $1,200 on a hotel room. In response, I offered to forward him the original purchase order and all my follow-up emails about the rising rates. The line went completely silent as he read through the email chain. I could practically hear him seething. All he could manage was a frustrated curse before hanging up on me. By the end of the day, every supervisor received an email announcing the immediate suspension of the purchase order system pending review. Apparently, the head of accounting was called into a closed-door meeting with the executive team. Word around the office is that they're going back to the company credit card system, but this time with better tracking software. The head of accounting, she's been reassigned to special projects, which everyone knows is corporate speak for. We can't fire you yet, but we're working on it. I received a personal email from the Chief Financial Officer apologizing for the situation and assuring me that future travel arrangements would be handled differently. He even approved my request to book my next quarter's hotel stay 3 months in advance on the company credit card he just reissued to me. Sometimes bureaucracy comes back to bite the very people who create it, and I've got to admit, watching it happen was worth every penny of that $1,200 hotel stay. Being a young mom isn't easy, especially when people make assumptions about you. I had my daughter when I was 20, and yes, it was earlier than planned, but I wouldn't change it for anything. Her father and I were together for 3 years before she came along, but he passed away in a car accident when I was 5 months pregnant. Now at 24, I'm doing my best to give my little girl the life she deserves. I work as a software developer, having finished my degree through night classes, while my parents helped with childcare. We have a comfortable life, and every Saturday, I take my daughter to the local park to play. It's our special time together, and she loves the swings and the sandbox. Last weekend started like any other. My daughter was building a sandcastle, and I was sitting on the bench nearby, keeping a close eye on her. That's when this woman, probably in her 40s, approached my daughter. At first, I thought she was just being friendly, but then I noticed how intensely she was talking to her. I immediately got up and walked over. I asked her if I could help her with something. Her response made my skin crawl. She exclaimed that my daughter was perfect for what she needed, saying it in a way that sent chills down my spine. When I asked her to explain what exactly she needed, she told me about her supposedly sick daughter. She explained that her daughter had an immune system disorder and couldn't leave the house. She then declared that her daughter needed friends to play with, and that my daughter would be perfect. She even suggested that my daughter could go to their house right away. I declined, explaining that I didn't know her and wouldn't let my daughter go anywhere with a stranger. She dismissed my concerns, insisting that being a mother herself made it okay. She tried to reassure me by mentioning she lived just 3 blocks away and that I could pick up my daughter in a few hours. I refused again and told my daughter it was time to leave. That's when her whole demeanor changed. She started laying out conditions, saying I couldn't come along because she couldn't risk me bringing diseases into her house. She then went on to make horrible assumptions about me, suggesting that as a young single mother, I must have gotten pregnant from sleeping around and might have sexually transmitted diseases. I was stunned. My daughter was looking up at me, confused and scared. I grabbed her hand and told her we were leaving, warning the woman not to follow us. She responded by calling me a selfish person and screaming about her sick daughter needing friends. I kept walking, pulling my daughter along. What happened next still makes my blood boil. This woman reached out and grabbed my daughter's hair, yanking her backward so hard that my baby girl fell flat on her back onto the concrete path. Her scream was something I'll never forget. Something in me snapped. Before I even realized what I was doing, I shoved Karen as hard as I could. She stumbled backward and fell onto her butt, looking shocked that someone would dare touch her. My daughter was crying and several people rushed over. A young couple helped my daughter up while an elderly man stood between me and Karen, who was now screaming about assault and threatening to call the police. I encouraged her to do exactly that, saying I wanted them there right away. The park security arrived within minutes. Karen tried to leave, claiming she needed to get home to her sick daughter, but 2 dads from the playground blocked her path until the police arrived. The police reviewed the park's security footage, which caught the entire incident. They took statements from multiple witnesses, including the elderly man, who said he'd been watching the whole thing unfold from his bench and saw Karen grab my daughter's hair. Karen was arrested for assault on a minor and attempted kidnapping. It turned out she was well known to the local police. She'd been caught harassing other parents at different playgrounds around town with stories about a sick daughter. She didn't even have a daughter. She was just a disturbed woman who'd been getting increasingly aggressive in her attempts to lure children. I pressed charges, and with the video evidence and witness statements, she was convicted. She's now serving 5 years in prison and has a permanent restraining order preventing her from coming within 500 feet of any playground or school once she's released. My daughter recovered from the physical trauma quickly, just some bruising on her back and a sore scalp, but it took a few months of therapy for both of us to feel comfortable at parks again. Now we go to a different park, one with better security and a tighter-knit community of regular parents. My daughter is back to loving the swings and sandbox, but I'm definitely more cautious about who approaches us. The young couple who helped my daughter that day have become good friends, and their kids often have play dates with my daughter, properly arranged, with both parents present, like normal people do. One day, I decided to take what I thought would be a temporary position at a high-end electronics repair shop. The flexible schedule appealed to me and the work was actually interesting. 3 years later, I'm still here, and I've become one of the most reliable employees. My boss started out great. He was understanding, flexible, and seemed to value work-life balance. That was until his divorce 6 months ago. Since then, he's become increasingly controlling and bitter, especially about time off. The holiday season was quite brutal. I worked 18 days straight covering for everyone else who had scheduled their time off months in advance. I didn't mind too much. The overtime pay was good, and I knew things would slow down after New Year's. My first day off was finally coming up on New Year's Eve, and I had plans to drive to my parents' house 2 states over. The day before New Year's Eve, my boss approached me at my workstation. He told me he needed me to cover tomorrow's shift because someone had called in sick. I apologized and explained that I couldn't because I was heading out of town to visit my family. He pointed out that I hadn't put in for time off. I reminded him that it was my first day off in over 2 weeks, so I didn't think I needed to formally request it since I wasn't scheduled. He let out a heavy sigh and said he'd figure something out. When I came back to work 2 days later, he called me into his office. He wanted to talk about my attitude regarding time off. When I asked what he meant by my attitude, he explained that he was really upset when I refused to work New Year's Eve. He complained that I hadn't scheduled it as time off, and he was counting on me to cover so he could get a day off himself. He said I had let him down. I reminded him that I had worked 18 days straight through Christmas and didn't think I needed to formally request time off for a day I wasn't even scheduled. He insisted that's not how things worked there, and that all time off needed to be scheduled in advance, claiming it was policy. I told him I understood and would make sure to schedule all my time off from now on. That night, I stayed late and pulled up our scheduling system. I carefully entered time off requests for every Saturday and Sunday for the next 6 months. I also requested all major holidays and threw in a few random Wednesdays just because I could. The system had no limits on how many requests you could submit, and there was nothing in the employee handbook about maximum time off requests. The next morning, my boss stormed out of his office. He demanded to know what I was doing, saying I couldn't request all these days off. I asked him why not, reminding him that he said all time off needs to be scheduled in advance and that I was following policy. He called it ridiculous and accused me of trying to game the system. I explained that I was following his exact instructions and gave him a choice. Either approve them all or go back to the old system where I just don't work when I'm not scheduled. When he called it insubordination, I corrected him, calling it malicious compliance. I also mentioned that if he wanted to talk about insubordination, we could discuss the labor laws regarding consecutive work days and proper overtime compensation, noting that I'd kept detailed records of all my hours. His face went from red to pale very quickly. He knew I had him cornered. After a long moment, he reluctantly agreed to return to the previous arrangement and asked me to cancel the requests. When I asked if he was sure, warning that I could submit them again if he changed his mind, he quickly assured me that wouldn't be necessary. I canceled the requests, but I made sure to keep screenshots of everything, including his approval of my new schedule in our messaging system. Since then, he's been noticeably less controlling about time off, not just with me but with everyone. 2 weeks later, corporate announced they were investigating management practices at all locations, and my boss was transferred to a smaller store in a different state. Turns out I wasn't the only one who had been keeping records of his increasingly erratic behavior. My new boss is actually fantastic. She underwent the same training I did and worked her way up. When I told her this story, she just laughed and said I should teach a masterclass in standing up for workers' rights. I think I'll schedule that for next Sunday. I'm a 37-year-old woman who's part of our local community choir. We had just finished our afternoon practice session and I was still wearing our performance uniform, all black, neat and proper, with my hair in a perfect bun. Instead of heading straight home, I decided to stop by the supermarket to check out their kitchenware section. You see, I'd recently gotten into baking after watching way too many cooking shows during the pandemic. My old bakeware had seen better days, and I've been eyeing some new silicone molds and proper measuring cups. The supermarket had recently advertised a sale on kitchen supplies, so I figured it was the perfect opportunity. I was in my element, comparing different spatulas and whisks, probably looking like a kid in a candy store. I'd been there for about 20 minutes, completely lost in my own world, when this young woman approached me. She politely asked me where she could find the pizza stones. I smiled and explained that I didn't work there, understanding her confusion. Black outfit, neat bun, intensely studying merchandise, I practically looked like a stock person doing inventory. Being naturally helpful, and having spent the last 20 minutes exploring every inch of the kitchenware section, I spotted someone else in black at the end of the aisle and started to offer to call them over. However, the young woman quickly interrupted me to explain that the person I was pointing to was actually her boyfriend and didn't work there either. I couldn't help but laugh at the situation and joked that we'd both have to find someone who actually worked there. However, the young woman didn't appreciate my amusement. She accused me of making fun of her and suggested I could have simply said I didn't know where the item was instead of putting on what she called an act. I tried to explain that I was genuinely trying to help, but she cut me off. She sarcastically commented about my outfit matching the staff uniform and accused me of trying to avoid doing my job. At this point, her boyfriend walked over to check if everything was okay. The young woman immediately complained to him about me, claiming I was an unhelpful employee who was now pretending not to work there. I attempted to explain again about my choir uniform, but she wouldn't listen. Instead, she started calling for a manager. An actual employee who had been stocking shelves nearby came over to see what the commotion was about. When asked about the problem, the young woman angrily explained that I was being extremely unhelpful and lying about not working there. The employee looked at me with confusion and explained to the young woman that I wasn't a staff member, pointing out that their uniforms had the store logo on the back. I slowly turned around to show my plain black top, and her face turned red. She tried to save face by arguing that I shouldn't dress like an employee and accused me of deliberately trying to confuse people. Her boyfriend, clearly embarrassed, tried to get her to leave. I couldn't resist making one last comment, sarcastically agreeing with her and promising to change out of my choir uniform before buying kitchen supplies in the future, joking about not wanting to confuse anyone by wearing black clothes in public. The employee, barely containing his laughter, helpfully told the young woman where she could find the pizza stones. She stormed off, dragging her mortified-looking boyfriend behind her. The employee and I shared a look and burst out laughing. He even gave me a 10% discount on my purchases for what he called providing the entertainment of the day. I still shop there regularly, but now I make sure to wear the brightest, most unemployee-like colors I can find. Though every now and then, just for fun, I'll wear black again and count how many people mistake me for staff. Current record: 3-in-1 shopping trip. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.